Yeah.
You should be able to share now, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Hi, Lynette. Hi, Scott. Hi, John.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see everybody.
Okay, we have everyone.
Right on the button. You want to get us started, Jeff? Are you ready?
1 minute.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll call it, thank you. So I'll call the August 18th meeting of the special meeting of the Carmel Climate Committee to order. And I see we have everybody here. First order of business is public appearances. Do we have anybody, Agnes, do you think we have anybody that's not?
I don't think so.
I don't see anybody.
I see Bob Harari. Maybe he'd like to chime in. Maybe not.
I'd like to say hello, everybody.
Good to see you, Bob.
Hey, Bob.
I'll fade into the background until I'm needed.
Hopefully we won't need you, but you never know. Any announcements from any of the committee members? I have one announcement. Yesterday, something came through, and I think I texted it to Agnes and to Carrie. Yesterday, the Coastal Commission received some guidance, put out some guidance for, some draft guidance for committees such as ours on how we think about adaptation strategies and what we should consider and all that. And maybe we will have a presentation. Maybe we can talk about this a little bit at the next meeting. So I'll sort of incorporate it by reference, however it is we do that here. And then I'll ask Agnes to send out a link to everybody. I think it's really important reading. It talks about basically the two issues that they talk about are water in the form of runoff and water supply, and sea level rise. And obviously both of those issues are pretty much at the top of the things that we talk about. So I think that's a very worthwhile reading. And I think that as we get further along in our adaptation planning, I think there are probably some guidelines and guideposts and lessons in there that we might use as we think about the own measures that we need to, the measures that we need to take ourselves.
Jeff, on that same topic, yesterday there was an ICARP seminar on, it was the last in their summer series on coastal water conservation, and it dealt with the 30 by 30 initiative primarily as focused on coastal waters. And it talked exactly about what you're referencing, waters, some upland areas to marshes and runoff, and in particular the storm drain and sewer runoffs that are causing problems up and down the coast. So if anybody's interested, along with reading what Jeff has referenced on the ICARP website, the PowerPoint presentations and the actual recording of the entire meeting will be available within a couple of days. And one of the coolest parts, I think, of this one, as opposed to some of the others, is that there was a huge amount of public input from everybody, from representatives from the Sierra Club to the National Resource Defense Council to various state agencies and a number of private citizens. So there's a lot of input there that I think also would be helpful to us.
How about this, Lynette? Why don't you write up a paragraph about the meeting and send a couple of links to Agnes, and when it comes online, Anya's can send out the information about that meeting along with my Coastal Commission, or not mine, but the Coastal Commission link at the same time.
Right. There has been another meeting that is on, of ICARP that's on land use, which might also be of particular interest, and I'll send the link to that as well.
Great. Okay. Any more announcements? So we'll move on. Item 1 on the agenda is review the IPCC working group summary for policymakers. And this is the thing that was in the news a couple of weeks ago, big time news a couple of weeks ago. And Michael has volunteered to sort of facilitate a discussion for us on this matter. So I have a presentation here that I'm going to run, and Michael, you only have 3 slides, so just tell me when you'd like me to
okay.
fast forward.
Yeah, this kind of started because, as Jeff said, this report's been all over the news. It was described by the UN Secretary as a code red report, but I thought it was important for the committee to actually to look at the report rather than just what the media was saying, because they were saying quite a few things. So I just made a little slide presentation here. This is the first slide, just has a picture of the report. And if you could go to the second slide, Jeff. This is a little video which basically tells you what the report is and how the IPCC organizes these reports and the very rigorous process they go through. It's only about 2 minutes. So if you could click on that, Jeff, that covers a lot of ground. Like it's not going to the link. I don't know why.
Let me just try again.
Yeah, didn't go to the link. Just went to the website. There it is. Okay.
Second time's the charm.
Yeah. Hit the full screen if you would. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry for the delay.
So one of the things that I think is really important is to understand the significance of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and also what it does and what it doesn't do. It's the main worldwide body that was created by the United Nations to collect and analyze and publish these reports, which the United Nations framework for these conventions, such as the one that in 2015 was in Paris. It's where the Paris Agreement came from. And then in 2022, the next one is going to be, or excuse me, I think 2021 or 22, it's going to be in Glasgow in Scotland. And as you saw in that little video, the IPCC, they do not do the research. What they do is they collect the research. And then the research is analyzed by 3 working groups who take different aspects of it. The particular report that just came out is from Working Group 1, which looks at the physical science. And the other 2 groups look at mitigation, and I'd have to look at all just impacts, how to deal with the impacts. So this is all an effort to get all the most current scientific information synthesized into reports that can be used by this committee, by the convention that's going to meet in Glasgow. The other thing that really needs to be understood is these reports really go through a really rigorous process of scientific and peer review. And in fact, it's been described as the biggest peer review process in the scientific community. And they literally have these committees, these plenary groups. They go through every single line in these summer reports. These summer reports are put out for policymakers. The actual report, this report is actually about 1,800 pages. And the summer report is down to about 50 some pages. And those are meant for policy makers to use and to develop their policies. The IPCC and the reports, they do not make policy. They don't suggest policy. They just basically report what the effects will be from certain levels of greenhouse gases. So that kind of brings me to the key points of discussion here about this report. There's a lot in the report. It covers a lot of things, but I wanted to focus just primarily on what questions this report might bring up for this group and the activities that we're doing. So one of the key points about the report is it has 5 new illustrative scenarios, which are labeled as shared socioeconomic pathways. So they're SSPs, and then they have a number. And those replace and expand the previous representative concentration pathway, which was the RCP scenarios. And this was what our committee based our goals on. If you remember in our early meetings, we talked about that. So one question for discussion, I think, would be, should the new SPC scenarios change or add to the goals of the committee? One thing that there were 3 representative concentration pathways, and there's 5 of the new shared socioeconomic pathways. So there's sort of a broader range of pathways, and also they take into consideration a broader range of effects. So I don't know if the committee had much time to look at that or has any comments on it, but that's kind of the first question I had for discussion that I posed to the committee.
Michael, thank you. First of all, thank you for putting together the presentation and focusing our thoughts on these questions. It's my opinion that we should look at these new scenarios. They provide us, I think, more specificity. They give us more of an understanding of the most recently available data and the conclusions that the report draws in the certain to very likely and on down to very unlikely expectation. And to not use the most recent and the most kind of hard science approach, I think would be a mistake for the committee. How that alters our real goals, I'm not sure I could draw that conclusion at this point, but to consider these and be sure that we are either saying we're going to stay with where we were because, or we feel we need to change where we were in terms of the RCP target to match these new pathways. I think it's important for us to have digested this enough to make a good conclusion about that.
I think your point's well taken. I think this probably needs to be agendized for a broader discussion. I don't think we can really do that at this meeting, but
I would just make a mention that although the SSPs, are the latest information, that is not yet what's on the state, what the state databases in the state
good point.
Models are using. And so we're, in terms of more granular data, we may actually be better off sticking with RCP for now. I'm sure it's going to, it's going to evolve. And it's continually evolving anyway. The science is evolving continually. So I think we want to keep those in mind and, keep that in mind as we keep on moving. But I don't know that we want to necessarily, pause and reevaluate at this point, just because I don't think we have that granular data at the state level. And really I think we want to look at the big picture, but then also when we come into sort of our more regional and statewide sort of data, we really have to use what's available.
Yeah, one of the things, Agnes, that I discovered in looking more at the interactive features in the report was that when you take our region, Western North America, there is a surprising amount of granularity in that data. And while it may not be a perfect match for where the state data is available right now, it feels to me like we should acknowledge, if nothing else, we should acknowledge that these new data points are out there, and that while the state may be playing a bit of catch up to some of these conclusions, we're mindful of that. So I do think it's worthy of a discussion, more so than we might be able to do at this meeting. From my point of view.
Yeah, well, maybe this next point that I sort of picked out of there.
If I may.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, so thank you. I agree with both Lynette and Agnes. I agree with Lynette to the extent that I think is worth a little bit of a discussion next month. And I also think, Agnes, it's probably worthwhile to sort of review, maybe as part of that discussion, it would be worthwhile to just review sort of the baseline assumptions we made with respect to RCP next month as well, especially as we start to get into these strategies. And I know we're going to talk about that later in the meeting with regards to what experts might consider, adaptation paths that we might take or something like that, which is all dependent on the RCP. But I think when it comes down to, I think when so I welcome that discussion, but I think when it comes down to brass tacks, I basically agree with Agnes. I think that this is probably the direction that the science, it seems like, far for me to be so much of a prognosticator, it seems like this is the direction that things will go. And I like, the verbiage here. I like the shared socioeconomic pathway verbiage much more than the representative concentration pathway verbiage. I think that shows a better understanding of what the real climate change problem is. But I still agree with Agnes that we have to, we've based a lot of the stuff that we've done so far and will do based on guidance that we've gotten from the state. And absent, a revision of that guidance that we've gotten from the state, I don't see how we can really I don't see how we can really move forward, with into a cloudier picture. I think that would probably be a little bit of a mistake. We might find ourselves a little bit confused, but that's my take right now.
I think looking at the report, I didn't see drastic differences, honestly, between what the state has put out and what these models are saying. They seem to be fairly well in agreement. So I think that SSP sort of maybe adds an extra layer of preciseness potentially. But I don't know that it necessarily, I think, they were still having the same, like levels of, would you call it, levels of preciseness for different, so for example, temperature was very, very high. They were very confident in the data, whereas in precipitation, the data was a little less confident. Mm-hmm. And I feel like that was sort of similar. We had similar outcomes with the RCP model. So I don't think it would change our findings really all that much. But we definitely, I obviously we should keep up with the latest.
Right. Yeah, I think a couple of things that I kind of went into this a little deeper with my next 2 points, and the second bullet point there the report states that global surface temperature will increase until at least mid-century. Also says that it's virtually certain that sea level rise will rise through the end of the century. So what we're looking at is that the amount of global warming we've already had and the level of greenhouse gases which are in the atmosphere are pretty much baked in the increases, for till mid-century. And so the other point they make is that the previous low likelihood outcomes are now could possibly become actual outcomes if we don't meet some of the, don't meet at least a 50% cutback in greenhouse gases by mid-century. So, I think that's something that we need to make sure that we've covered in our assessment report. I'm not saying we haven't, but I just think that should be a point of focus. The other thing that I thought was really interesting about the reports the last time is that many changes in the climate system have come larger in direct relation to increasing global warming. So as a result, extremes are larger in frequency and intensity with every additional increment of global warming. And they have a chart on page 27, which shows certain types of extreme weather, like drought, heat waves, inundation from rain, and the frequency over 10-year periods that they will start to increase as you have incremental increases in temperature. So based upon whatever RCP we selected, now we have a frequency range, so we could say specifically we can expect this type of extreme impact from global warming to happen at a certain time period. And for policymakers, if you have past events and you know what happened during those events, what the costs of those events were, you can take those numbers and then you can use a projected frequency based on certain temperature ranges to figure out what types of economic challenges you're going to be facing in the future. So there's a lot of specific data there which can really, it's kind of what you talk about, the granular data, which can lead to some very specific economic planning. And one of the things that I really think is not being taken into consideration by a lot of the political discussion, because so much of political discussion focuses on economic growth. But in the report, they pointed out that the only time we've had any flattening of greenhouse concentrations was in 2010 as a result of the recession, and it was a global downturn, and then also in 2020 because of the pandemic. So anytime politicians now are talking about economic growth, there are greenhouse gas increases associated with that. So we've got a conflict here. You know, how do we mitigate this policy of growth with the effect, you know, that's going to increase greenhouse gases? Now, that's a national conversation, of course, but down on our level here at the city level, we're making, you know, budget plans based upon certain levels of money that's going to come into our economy. And so we've got to account for, if we're making 5-year projections, I mean, you know, if we don't cut back, I think by 45, if we don't get back to, what is it, the 2020 or whatever the baseline we're using by 2030, you know, we're going to start experiencing some really extreme events, which are going to cost the city a lot of money. And I really think that you know, it's going to affect tourism. It's going to affect world travel. So there's we can't just have this business as usual attitude about economic growth and the income that's going to come into the city, particularly when we're looking at increased frequency of these extreme events.
Michael, that's a really good point. And I think that's really what our committee is supposed to be doing, is bringing the awareness of what many of these effects will be to the city. So I think that's an excellent point. Anyas, I had a question for you. Do you think that the state of California is going, obviously this report is very new. Do you think they're going to incorporate some of what's in this report to what they're thinking about?
I'm sure they will. I would expect they would, yeah.
So it's going to trickle down to the California level.
Yeah, it just takes a minute.
The other thing too is that the report, as Anya said, the report isn't really changing the recommendations about what levels of greenhouse gas emissions we need to have at certain time periods. So the big two time moments right now are 2030 and 2050. So those are already in the bills that are coming at the state level. They've been in that for quite a while. So, I think the challenge obviously is meeting those goals. And then I think, as I was saying, the other thing is for cities to be planning realistically about how this is going to affect their income, And I don't think they should be making overly optimistic budget plans based upon past performance or a business as usual attitude. And,
yeah, we've already seen this, and we saw this during the budget discussions in a really minor way this past time when we had a short discussion about the size of the storm drain system and whether we needed to plan for 10-year storms or 20-year storms. So these things are really going to start to trickle down in terms of how the city allocates money, and the 10-year storm versus 20-year storm turns out to be, according to Bob, and maybe he's still listening, not that big of a deal, but some of these other things are going to be a big deal. The thing that was somewhat frightening to me about, sort of skimming through this report a couple of days ago was that, the re-emphasis on the likelihood of these sort of extreme weather events. I think it was 1983 when we lost some seawalls and put up some revetments after that big disaster, and what would happen, if we had another 1983 type scenario in 2023 when sea level, when the storm is bigger and sea level has risen by 6 inches. What's that going to do around the city, and are we prepared, or is it even possible to be prepared for something like that? So that's the thing that I found, when I read it, I found pretty frightening.
The frequency is very, very scary. And that's what they show in these, on page 27. So as if we see, the temperature going up incrementally and getting above this 1.5 by 2030, the city's going to be looking at, much more frequent extreme weather events. And the state is
I was going to say, my sense, we talked a little bit about this point last month
Mike?
in terms of, the extreme weather events and how to put that in the hazard report. And it just feels like, I know Anya's captured that to some degree, but this IPCC report, I think, really gives us language and further clarification on that we should put in at least that front end section where we're providing some context. So I would think minimally we should capture some of this language in that.
The other piece that I think speaks to what Michael was talking about with future planning is the sense of urgency, I think, that this report creates of getting to a net zero CO2 emission, and what we view as our responsibility as a city in moving toward that. Because if everybody ignores that urgency, then the whole issue of warming and all of the cascading events that come from that just exacerbates itself well past 2050. So I feel like at least for me, the awareness and the sense of urgency about the net zero emissions becomes important. And so then that asks the question about what, if anything, can a little entity like we are do about carbon removal? And is that something that we discuss as a potential for collaboration with other entities, other jurisdictions? Because the whole of warming, which is going to continue at least until 2050, irrespective of what we do, every year we don't do more, it pushes that date out further and it pushes the temperature even higher.
Yeah, the time is very short. We've known about this problem since the late 80s, and we pretty much wasted about 30 years. And now we're right up against the gun. If we don't have to have a change in direction by 2030, it's going to be very bad. And the report continually talks about, centuries and millennia for these things to cycle back through the environment and, become stabilized. So it's, the impacts are severe. They're going to become more frequent, and they're going to last a long time if we don't get to a point by mid-century where we become carbon neutral, and then the global warming will stabilize, and then by the end of the century, it'll start to possibly go back down. So that's pretty much I had about the report, and I appreciate everybody's discussion. I didn't want to make it sound like I didn't think the report so far that we've made isn't covering this, but I just thought it's good to look at this and see if there's anything we can incorporate, or if you can find any data that you can use here to just make the points you've already made stronger, more significant, or easy to understand. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael, for that. Next on the agenda, we have an update on the Climate Action Plan tasks and next steps, and I believe Agnes is going to do this.
Yes. And I'll be sharing a really short presentation.
Before we move to the next agenda item, are we going to put a further discussion of this report on the September agenda, or what is our plan?
I think the plan was to sort of have a further discussion. It sounds like I think the plan is to put a further discussion of this on the next month's agenda. As I said, I'd sort of like to just have a little bit of a refresher on RCP and where we are. Does that all sound feasible, Agnes?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Come in.
Okay, so let's see. You guys can all see that? The presentation, yeah, right? Yes. Okay, so it was just a quick update. I just wanted to provide everybody with a quick update about our climate action plan and where we're at. We did select LSA Associates as for our consultant. If you guys remember at our last meeting when we mentioned that we requested proposals from 3 consultants, we got 1 proposal back, which was responsive to all the items in our request and was within our budget. So we're excited to work with LSA Associates. Our project manager will be Michael Hendricks. He's got lots of experience, so I think we'll have a good team there. I just wanted to provide just a little bit about what their scope will be, and I'm sure we'll have Michael coming to one of our upcoming meetings. I want to because this is a tight budget, I want to make sure that he shows up when he has something interesting to provide. So that's why he's not here today, but he will probably be there either, if not at our next meeting, definitely the one after that. So, but I would expect probably our next one even. So in terms of project tasks for LSA, there'll be just a standard project kickoff and management. We will do the kickoff. That will be just more of a technical, tasks and deadlines, et cetera, type of meeting. So that'll be internal. Then they will go straight into the technical memorandum for on our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So the inventories that were already prepared by AMBAC. And they will review the inventories for those discrepancies that have been identified already, including the large decrease in greenhouse gas emissions from transportation. I think that was between 2010 and 2015. So they'll review these and provide recommendations on how to address these, and also will provide recommendations on how to modify our accounting of emissions to do more of a, what is it called? A travel destination type model, as opposed to the within city limits model that AMBAC has been providing up until now. So that'll be very useful information. Then from there, we will move into forecasting. So they will do business as usual and adjusted business as usual scenarios. The adjusted business as usual, if you'll remember, incorporates any upcoming state regulations that will reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Oftentimes it has to do with the building code, any new efficiency requirements in the building code, for example. And then we'll move into task 4, which is reduction strategy. So they'll help us, evaluate greenhouse gas reduction potential of different strategies, and then I'll provide a summary memo. In terms of timeline, their project schedule and our project schedule are lined up. So we are looking at, so if, there's my cursor. At the top here, you've got the months, so starting August, September, October, November, December. And then the different tasks. Task 2, which is the greenhouse gas inventories recommendations, that's August through October. So we should hear back from them probably September or October for sure on that. Then we will move into the forecasts in October. And reduction strategies will start October, November, actually November. And that lines up well with what we're proposing in terms of a timeline for our workshop, because that could be where some of the community ideas and thoughts for strategies would come in, and that would be pretty early on in the process. And then a final report February, March or April timeframe. So that's my update on the climate action plan side of things. Are there any questions at this point?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Is Michael Hendricks, is he familiar with Carmel and the fact that, you know, half our homes are unoccupied or full-time and that we're very much a tourist destination? Because I'm sure that's going to affect his analysis.
He's aware of some of that. I think we will provide a little bit more background for him. He has helped some municipalities locally, but I think he's not from this area. So I think providing him a little more detail on that will help.
Okay. All right, good. Just keeping that top of mind. Thank you.
Yes.
Agnes, when that happens, I'm sure part of what he would benefit from knowing is the activity that goes on here in terms of housing turnover and both new building and remodels, because I feel like what we do with that in the future obviously plays into greenhouse emissions.
You're talking about a rebuilding type of
or new
construction
yeah.
related?
Either rebuilds or new builds, because we've got, you know, there are tear downs that are basically new builds here. So both of those could contribute, and some recommendations on what we might do with respect to that would be helpful. Okay,
and you're talking about how to retrofit the new houses to be more efficient. Is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about materials?
Well, it could be any of those things. Materials, retrofitting, it could be gas fireplaces versus no gas in the new builds. It could be no fires in, you know, anywhere. It could be all of those things that would relate to emissions.
Okay, yeah. Yes, I think he'll have some good feedback on that.
And I would say, to take what Lynette says in a slightly different direction, you know, I think we all know that concrete is a big emitter of greenhouse gases, and we have a lot of, you know, I'm interested in knowing what the contribution to our greenhouse gas inventory all this construction is. So I think
we'll say this about the materials. I know materials right now are not part of our greenhouse gas inventory. That's like next level greenhouse gas inventory. But that doesn't change the fact that doesn't keep us from, you know, addressing that issue, because materials are a real issue as far as greenhouse gas emissions. It's just that it's a next level inventory that we are not budgeting for at the moment.
So to go off in a slightly different direction, then I would simply say, you know, so for example, all of the miles traveled by construction workers to get into Carmel is sort of maybe an easier item to quantify than the greenhouse gas emissions because of concrete or wood or whatever it is. We certainly have a lot of people coming into town and so on. So those kinds of construction effects, I'm very interested in sort of quantifying and understanding what those are. So, you know, Carrie talks about us being a tourist town, and I think that that's a huge contributor to, you know, not necessarily, it warps our greenhouse gas inventory profile. And I would say that in the same way, certainly right now, the amount of construction we have going on in town may have the same effect, may have the same impact. I don't know whether that is or not, but I would be interested in, even if we can't or won't sort of quantify the greenhouse gas emissions from concrete or other construction materials, you know, it would be pretty easy to, for example, query the concrete companies around here and just see how many 8-yard concrete trucks came into the city last year. So at least we would know what the order of magnitude is. And I think that's sort of important information for us to have, even if we don't exactly quantify it.
And even if we can't truly quantify, which it sounds like we may not be able to have it be meaningful based on what we can afford to do. At least if Michael and his colleagues could be encouraged to point out some of those things so that they get on the screen, whereas they may not be on some people's awareness level as yet.
Yeah, we can definitely, I don't know that we can quantify all these things, but it's not because they can't be quantified that we can't address them.
Right.
I think, I think we'll find that quantification only gets us so far, and we can still address it. We can still qualitatively address some of these issues for sure. All right. Any more questions for our next steps here? I think we can move on.
Right, so the next thing on the agenda is review, provide comments, or approve the summary sheet for the Monterey Regional Waste Management District presentation. And before I do this, we have like a couple of, I see that we have a couple of people that have zoomed in. Just wanted to make sure there isn't, I haven't been very good about asking for public comment during any of these items. So have we missed anybody? Okay, so members of the public, feel free to chime in. Carrie, you're going to do this one?
Yes, thank you. I know it's been a while since we've, if we can remember when the Monterey Regional Waste Management District, Tim, gave a presentation about what they're doing in regards to methane gas and recycling and composting. So if people have had a moment to take a look at the summary here and let me know if I've omitted anything, but I think after his presentation, I think we determined that they're doing a good job of trying to stay on top of this issue. And the district, the Waste Management District, is really being forced to look to the future because of some of the state mandates with SB 1383, as Anya knows. We're going to be starting composting. We're going to be starting organic diversion on a public basis starting in January. And so that's going to be a focus of educational component of getting everybody to realize that they have to start collecting scraps and fruits and vegetables and cooked meats and being able to put it in the yard waste to minimize those gas emissions. That's really going to be the effort that you're going to see based on what the Waste Management District and your garbage hauler, which is green waste for us, are going to be doing. So that's what I kind of focused on this summary. And so if anybody has any comments, I look forward to doing any editing.
Carrie, do you know what that collection program is going to look like?
Well, to my knowledge, and Anya's will help me out, she's been on the task force or the technical advisory committee to really try to figure this out. From what I know, and Anya's, fill in, is I just read something today, is you're going to be taking any fruits, vegetables, cooked meats, and you're going to be able to put it in your yard waste container. And there's certain things that you're not going to be able to put in there, like grease, raw meats, and compostable items are not going to be able to go in there. How'd I do, Agnes? Am I up to date?
Yeah, that's pretty accurate.
For Carmel, we're not going to add another organics yellow bin. Unlike the commercial for the restaurants and the hotels, will have to add a commercial one if they haven't done it so far. But for the general public, you're going to put these items in your yard waste container. They're suggesting that you have a bowl that you put in the freezer or under your sink and then put it in your yard waste container. Does that help, Michael?
Yeah, what's the definition of compostable items?
Well,
Compostable, like disposable ware and takeout containers that are
Oh, okay,
labeled as
okay.
compostable.
All right, the stuff we put in recycling now.
No, this is a real pet. This is an enormous pet peeve of mine, and I think I've spoken to Carrie about this before. You know, these items, forks and spoons and bowls and crap like that, that's marked as compostable. We don't have the facility here to compost them, so people put them in the recycling, and they're not supposed to be in the recycling. They're supposed to be in the trash.
mm-hmm.
And if you ask me, and I'm on a little bit of a soapbox here, but if you ask me, we shouldn't allow people to sell these things or use these things here, because for all intents and purposes, they're trash. And it's just, it's improper messaging. It's improper on so many levels that it just drives me insane. So Carrie, you have received comment from me.
I know.
The issue is we don't have an option.
Right.
We don't have a good option.
Right, and that's okay. And it's okay to not have a good option for composting them. I understand that we can't industrially compost these things, but then we shouldn't sell them, because what's happening is...
Yeah, but what I'm saying is we don't have an option, like an alternative. Like there is no disposable product
Mm-hmm.
that is
Well, why can't we, for example, sell recyclable plastic? And at least, I think to me, this is just a big greenwashing exercise. People sell these compostable
Jeff,
bowls like they're not
number
trash.
One, it's
What a simple question really set off a discussion.
Yes.
so let me,
Actually, I learned some things here. I didn't realize that we didn't
items-
have a facility to do that. Go ahead, Karen.
Well,
I'm sorry.
compostable items are much better to put in the landfill than plastic items, whether they're recyclable or not, because compostable items degrade much faster than plastic. So it is better to buy compostable and use compostable, because it will it will degrade much quicker.
Also,
Right?
they're not petroleum based either, so
Yes.
it's the production of it is also better than the plastics. If we were better at recycling plastics, then maybe that would be better to use recyclable plastics, but we're not better at that either. So either way, it sort of ends up in the landfill, unfortunately, which puts us in a difficult place. But that's why we're still pushing the compostables, because they are, in the end, if they both end up in the landfill, we're better off with compostable.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean that we won't in the future have a facility that can compost these, because the landfill continually sort of looks to improve their processes. So we don't know that we're not in the future going to be able to do it. It's just at this point in time, we can't yet do a good job
I
of
think
it.
this discussion right here is a perfect example, to Michael's point about that simple question spun this off. This is a perfect example of the challenge that we have to educate the public, and to whether it's on this requirement that's going to come in January, or on any of our recommendations that come out of this committee, because none of this is necessarily intuitively obvious. Some of it is, but a whole lot of it isn't. So any lessons we learn along the way about what worked and didn't work in our discussions or educational efforts, I think we should tuck away and use when we get to our action plans and final recommendations, because this is not going to be easy.
No, absolutely. It's going to
Can I
be
ask
quite
one
the
more?
challenge. And Agnes has been meeting, I think, every 2 weeks with this committee, because there's also a food diversion component to this that they don't even know how they're going to address in terms of the restaurants, right?
Luckily, I don't anticipate any Carmel establishments to be actually directly impacted by the regulation itself. I'm hoping that they will be able to take advantage of whatever system is set up for food recovery, but I don't think we'll actually end up having hardly any businesses that are regulated. Maybe one or two, but it'll be very, very limited. So at least that. But we hopefully will be able to take advantage of the system that gets put in place regionally. So
yeah. And the Waste District is also looking to help educate the public along with green waste. So there is going to be a push to educate the public, but it's not going to be easy.
it's not going to be easy.
Michael?
How do the compostables figure into the methane equation? Is that something that's been talked about, or you have any information on? Or?
Well, the compostables are going to be processed so that when they degrade, that methane gas is going to be captured and utilized. So it's not going to go into the atmosphere. So it's actually going to be repurposed as CNG gas at the waste facility and power the green waste garbage collection trucks, right, Inez?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Yes.
So that's by, rather than just putting it in the landfill, you're actually going to be a particular vendor is going to take the yard waste with the organics and be able to process it and capture the methane gas.
Okay, I have one more question.
Mhm.
So they haven't figured out how they're going to deal with the leftover food that they're talking about, maybe an agreement with the Monterey Food Bank or something. And did you say, Anya, that's not going to affect Carmel restaurants? Or
No, so the CalRecycle regulation has business size, requirements, business size tiers for who gets rolled into the SB 1383 requirements. And at this point in time, it doesn't look like our businesses are large enough to get rolled into the food recovery. That doesn't mean we're not going to want to encourage it, and that modifications in the future might not have them become, regulated. CalRecycle has done this in the past, where they keep, lowering the thresholds so that more businesses get involved. But, by that point in time, I think we'll have a system pretty well in place, locally and regionally. So
there'd be a way for restaurants to volunteer to get involved in the program, or do you have?
Yes, I think that's what we would want to do, is we'll want to, once we have a system that's a little bit better defined, we'll want to actually have the restaurants who want to volunteer to do it. That would be my goal, would be to encourage restaurants who want to volunteer to do that, to actually be able to do it, take advantage of it.
Can I ask one more slightly less controversial question?
Go for it, Jeff.
What do we do with avocado pits? Into the green waste bucket or into the trash?
I put it in the green waste bucket. I mean, it is compostable.
Yeah. Jeff thinks it takes a long time because he composts himself, so he knows how long it takes.
I don't compost the avocado pits. They don't ever degrade in my backyard system, so they end up in the trash.
So, but they do get, I believe they get chipped, like the wood would get chipped. And so in that sense, I think they would degrade probably faster in that setting. I think. But ice plant, ivy, and poison oak don't go in the green waste. I don't know if you guys were aware of that, but
ice plant and poison oak, yeah.
Yeah, and ivy also.
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I shudder to ask what happens if you put poison oak in the green waste bin. The consequences are just unimaginable.
Right. Right. Well, obviously there's a lot to this, so thank you everybody for your questions. And if you have any edits, I think I just found one. But other than that, I'll let Anya's know about that. I capitalized something I wasn't supposed to. So details. All right. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
I think we're on to the next item, which is review and update the list of partners to engage and discuss the public outreach approach for what we're doing.
Yeah, and I'm going to lead this discussion. I have a few slides as well. I'm going to, I thought we might try something, we as a group haven't been very good about keeping up with this, and I'm as guilty as everybody else in terms of sort of keeping up with our partners and understanding where our partners are and keeping them in the loop. And maybe I'm the most guilty of everybody. But we have a list. There's a list in the packet of partners. And I think I'm going to watch Anya's here. I think what we should do is start getting updates from people. So everybody has been assigned, and these assignments have been pretty static forever. They haven't really changed. And everybody has, I have more than most. I think Carrie and I have a lot of them. But everybody has been assigned to these partners to sort of keep in touch with or keep abreast or get feedback from. And I think we should start a slightly more formal process of sort of tracking who talks to whom. And if that's acceptable to everybody, I'm going to talk about, hopefully over the course of the next 45 minutes or so, we'll define a strategy sort of for what we're going to do about talking to our partners and groups about adaptation and action. But I think we should start as a team, the 8 of us, start tracking who we talk to and what they say, just so that it's a little bit more public and we make a good effort. So does that sound okay to everybody? So I think it's okay. I know that there are some groups that are on the list that maybe we don't need to talk to. But if your name, my ask of everybody, including myself and Carrie, is if your name is by one of those groups, send us a note and we'll take your name off when we receive the note. Like if we don't think that we need to be talking to, and I can't remember, I don't have the list in front of me, unfortunately, but if we don't have, if you're assigned a group that we absolutely do not need to talk to, like TAMC, for example, then send us a note and we'll write a note on the spreadsheet and take the name off the list, and we won't worry about it anymore. And everybody will see that we took TAMC off the list because Jeff Barron said we didn't need to talk to TAMC. I have, in an effort to reduce Agnes's workload, because I know she has a lot to do, I did talk to the city attorney about me sort of just keeping track of this list. So I'll volunteer to do that. So I'll keep track of the list. So I'll take ownership of this partner list from now on. But let's just start tracking who we talk to, and we'll start talking now about what to do. So my ask of everybody is that before next month, you sort of review the list and talk to some of the people. If it's time to talk to them, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Talk to some of them, and we'll see.
You're muted, Jeff.
So talk to them and we'll see where we need to go, because this is really where I think where we are now, we're going to start devising strategies and writing reports. And I think we really need to keep everybody in the loop. At this point. This is where the rubber hits the road in terms of these relationships. So I'm going to go through my little slide presentation here. So let me see if I can bring it up. Okay, so what I hope to do today is discuss and develop an approach for these two plans for the development of the final reports. And so we're going to develop an action plan for outreach. So sorry, my slides are a little bit behind. Who talks to which organizations, which we've already talked about? When do we contact and then present to these organizations, which we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about action plans and adaptation plans and where we specifically are in these work plans that Agnes has kept up. And then at the end of the discussion, I'd like to have a short discussion about the tools that we need. So at the beginning, a year ago, sort of when things kind of came to a remote halt, we had developed some slides that I know a number of us used and took out to organizations. And I think it would be a good idea to figure out whether we need to develop another set of slide or whether we need to develop marketing materials, like something you would take to the farmer's market, for example. Here's a slick brochure that you can take to the farmer's market. So we should talk about that too. What the things that the committee thinks would be good sort of collateral for us to have and for us to use as a team. So everybody doesn't have to develop their own materials. Who contacts? So I've talked about that. We've talked about this, and I'm going to keep the list. So we'll be in touch with that. This is the.
I just had a quick question, Jeff, before
Yes.
we went on. I wanted to double check with everybody if we felt like the organizations, if we felt whether we were missing any organizations in the list.
Yes, I think the Carmel Foundation.
Okay. Yeah, I thought we might want to at least add that one.
And that one's mine. And we're working on them.
Yeah, Lynette, we can talk about that tomorrow or the next day and see, kind of catch up and see where you are and see what kind of help you need.
Right.
Okay, was that the only one we think we're missing? Sounds like it.
Okay, so
Okay.
This is the adaptation project plan, work plan that Agnes has been keeping. And this is, where we are is over here on the August 21 thing. And we seem to have sort of skipped this step, which is workshops to gather feedback on local vulnerabilities and strengths, community priorities, and ideas for adaptation. So this is something that I think we as a group should have been doing over the course of the past 6 months. And I don't think we've done a very good job at doing this. So I'll talk about this in a second. And then, so we need to sort of catch up. We need to catch up with these things. And then the second big group is that other big 6-month line down at the bottom, workshop we decided we were going to have a workshop in November to gather community ideas and gather feedback. And so we need to sort of get people to this workshop, and then we need to go back to these organizations after the workshop to talk about the things that came about the workshop and get more public input. Does that sound okay to you, Agnes? Okay. So the way I thought about this was this is the task that we've sort of forgotten about, which is the assess vulnerability, gather strategies from experts. And the best example I have of this is the wastewater district. So I should be going back to the wastewater district and talking about what their strategies are for, we know what their strategies are for mitigating climate change, but I need them to help me develop a strategy for the city to be on top of the wastewater thing. So for example, we could have a liaison to the wastewater district. The city council could pass a resolution in favor of this action or that action or some other action. But in order for me to propose a strategy like that, it would be really helpful for me to get the buy-in of the wastewater district. And so that they're not blindsided when we produce a report. And I think that these other two groups, also the Friends of the Forest and the Friends of the Mission Trail Nature Preserve, I think they're sort of the same way. We're going to be doing a lot of things that affect, we're going to be talking about a lot of things that affect the status of the forest and the status of the Mission Trail Nature Preserve. And they have experts, in the Friends of the Forest and in the Friends of the Nature Preserve that can help us devise adaptation strategies. So for example, and if they don't, then my guess is that they can provide us with some resources for people that will. So for example, one of the things that may happen here over the course of the next 100 years or less, depending on the accuracy of the IPCC report, is that we may no longer have Monterey pines. And, because it may be too warm here to support Monterey pines without infestations of pests and disease. So if we were going to devise a strategy to keep up our urban forest, the first place we might look is to the Friends of the Forest for resources on how to do that. So I think we have groups in our list of contacts that can help us to devise city strategies that we've outlined in the hazard and assets matrix that we've already put together. So if I took the Friends of the Mission Trail Nature Preserve and I went down the hazards and assets matrix, I could say, they have something to provide here, here, and here. Let me go talk to them about the things that we need or the things that we're thinking about and see what they have to say. And from that, we can start to put together our list of strategies. Yes, Lynette?
Jeff, does that include us using our city resources in that discussion? I mean, just as a simple example, to engage the city forester and her colleagues in kind of a three-way conversation among Friends of the Forest or Mission Trail Nature Preserve, that group and the committee. Because when Sarah talked to us, it was clear that there was work that was either beginning or probably as much further along now in terms of some of that redefinition.
Without having talked to Bob, my assumption would be absolutely that would include the forester.
Okay.
And I don't
just
remember.
As an example.
Yeah, and it's a great example and a great question. If the forester isn't on that list, then the forester should be on that list.
Right.
And it should be, my guess is that Sarah should be assigned to the same person that is assigned to the Friends of the Mission Trail, Friends of the Forest. And I assume that that's Scott, without going back at the list, I assume that that's Scott that's in charge of that. But yes, we do have these sort of specialized city resources here. And I think that what we'll talk about in a minute is getting sort of the back end stakeholders involved next. But Sarah needs to, certainly if we're going to give Sarah a task in the report, then we don't want to blindside Sarah by saying, oh, we're going to let the city forester do this, or let me say blindside Chip by giving a task
And Bob and everybody else.
that works for him.
Right.
I don't really care about Bob.
Still there? No.
Yeah. Just checking. So are we okay? So do we understand, does everybody understand sort of what this sort of task is? Like, as we start to put together strategies, getting the buy-in from sort of the service providers, I guess is what it is, or the field experts to help us put these strategies together. Okay. And then the next step, I think after, and this is what's going to happen surrounding the this workshop that we decided that we were going to do, we need to get buy-in from the people that live here, from the Carmel community, that this is what we're going to do. So if we make the decision, and just harping on the Monterey pines, if we make the decision that we're no longer going to plant Monterey pines, that we're going to start planting Torrey pines, or what's the other one, Agnes? The other one that we see around, the other pine tree that we see around with the bigger things. You know,
that's a good question, and no, that's not a question for me.
So if we make a decision such as that, you know, we need to vet that decision through public comment, through this sort of public input process, you know, before we have the workshop and sort of after we have the workshop. And so this is the more results outreach as opposed to the planning outreach. So getting people to buy into the eventual results of what we produce.
I think in terms, and that's sort of a area specific recommendation, but I believe the Forester this year is putting together an update to the forest management plan, and that would be a good place for these considerations. So I know it's at the top of her mind. I know she's definitely thinking about the future. Now, how we incorporate her thoughts, how we incorporate back and forth, you know, how our thoughts are incorporated in her plan, how her thoughts incorporated in our plan. We just need to make sure we keep, you know, in contact with her, and I can do that. But I know she's already thinking about it, and I believe she's already working on it.
Yeah, I know we had money for that in the budget. And I think that, you know, with regards to that specific item, I can't imagine that Sarah's going to do that without the input of the Forest and Beach Commission. I'm sure she'll trot it out. I'm sure she'll trot it out to that commission at some point in the future. Yeah, and maybe we could ask her very nicely to trot it out to us as well. So that we can sort of review it from our slightly different, oh, look, there's Bob. We can review it from a slightly different perspective, from our perspective, you know, which is sort of a more climate change focused thing than what the Forest and Beach Commission might do. And so we could have some input into that. So I think that's a great example of sort of working with the resources we have here. Bob, do you want to say something?
No, not really. I just wanted to reiterate what Agnes was talking about. Yeah, Sarah is very much plugged into climate change. We do have that forestry master plan in the budget. We haven't started it yet as a capacity, but we intend to one of these days. And I agree to, of course, the forestry management plan would be very much in tune with the Forest and Beach Commission, but also bringing it to the Climate Committee does make a lot of sense as well. So I'm on board.
I think what I'm not hearing, just to add back in, which I heard earlier, was tying in the Friends of the Forest in particular. I mean, and maybe Mission Trail Nature Preserve people. I talked to both of them, and there is interest to at least have a chance to take a look at what's being proposed before it's finalized.
They certainly will.
Somehow looping them in, I think, is important.
Right, absolutely.
Do we need to invite them to our meeting? Because I believe they get the notifications.
Well,
would it be helpful?
Speaking for Rainey, you know, on the tree selection, I think she wants to probably not just to come to the meeting, but to be involved with that topic. And that's the same thing I've run into, like with MCAR, the realtor. They're trying to get plugged in at the right time on the right topic.
Okay.
So the logistics aren't quite clear in my mind how to do that, but I think that's something we should try and think through.
Okay, so maybe we can, once we start looking at adaptation strategies, maybe we can prioritize, you know, different days that we do, you know, on different meeting days. We might focus on different maybe priorities, and then maybe invite those folks to our meeting on those days. See if that can work.
I think that could work. Another way is if we can somehow, like if Sarah's working up a proposal for, say, tree selection, we know that's a hot topic for Friends of the Forest. Can we then share that with them and get their feedback before it goes, you know, as a final, here's what we've decided decision? So that's another way to think about it, to kind of reach out to them with those specific elements.
Scott, I think we've been more than proactive with that. Sometimes some of the volunteer groups do not respond, so we just have to kind of keep to the schedule. But certainly our intent is to always get the the buy-in, especially on the key committees and volunteers out there.
Okay. And then like Rainey, when I spoke to her about this, she had some specific resources that she suggested we look to, because they're like on tree selection, there's a ton of work that's been done regionally in the Bay Area and different places. So she wasn't necessarily saying that she has the expertise, but she says, hey, you should make sure you look at these resources. So it'd be nice to know that Sarah's taking advantage of those.
Right. And also Rainey usually attends the Forest and Beach Commission meeting. So she stays up to speed on pretty much everything we're doing.
Okay.
Okay, so back to this list.
Sorry, Jeff. You know, this just brings to mind the kind of tricky element, especially in resource constrained environments like what we are in the city, that when staff are given a responsibility that and oftentimes a time frame for that responsibility, and they're resource constrained, it becomes very difficult for them to do all of this coordination and triangulation that we're talking about. And to the extent that we on this committee or others, either on some of the other commissions or other groups, can help bring people to the table and to give something as an example to Sarah that might be instructive in her work, I think that's an important activity for us to own, because there's just not enough time. As we know from Anya's and Evan's workload, there's just not enough time for them to have all the eyes and ears that we collectively have that are required to produce the best end results. And it just seems like that it's incumbent upon us to be mindful, very mindful of that, and to do what we can to alleviate that that stress.
I mostly agree with that. You know, the thing that makes me, and I'll speak honestly here for a second, the thing that makes me a little bit cringy about this discussion with Sarah is that Sarah is our city forester. And I'm assuming, I think she is competent, and I assume that she's competent. And I'm not sure that I really have anything to offer her with respect to other resources to do tree selection. I'm not a forester. I don't know what there is. You'll notice that when earlier in the meeting, when I offered to take this task out of Agnes's lap and put it in mine, it's a bookkeeping task. You know, it's a bookkeeping and an organization task, and I'm completely qualified to do that, as are all of us. It's not a task that has anything to do with compostables, although I would really like to have that task because obviously I have views on that subject. But it doesn't have anything to do with compostables or what goes into the trash or how to reduce copper out of the water leaching into the ocean or anything like that. So my advice, you know, as a professional who was in a past life was given advice like this, is to, if we're going to offer support to our staff members, and I absolutely think we should offer support and to our staff members, I think we're more qualified to do it in a little bit of this auxiliary role, right, you know, this bookkeeping stuff or anything like that, rather than offering to do tree research for Sarah. You know, that's Sarah's job. She's good at it. We should let her do that. You know.
But Jeff, you asked us to reach out to the people that, you know, other people in the community. And I just feel like we're cutting them off. And I spoke with Rami Allard, and she provided some resources. We put it in our write-up. Now the question is Sarah using that? Is she even looking at it? Or is she just doing it on her own, independent of those expert resources that the community identified? She may, you know, I don't know, maybe she's got a very deep experience in climate change impacts on trees. But I think the thing I'm wondering is, are we circling that? Is she at least looking at what we put in our report around the trees, which included Ramey's inputs, and it was suggested that, you know, on that particular topic, tree selection be done with public chance to comment. So what I'm not really convinced, it sounds like Sarah just owns it. Maybe she's the right person to own it, but I feel like we're cutting off the community, which is, I thought, what we were trying to achieve.
Yeah, and I think I'll walk back my comments a little bit. I didn't mean to suggest, you know, certainly from our perspective, and getting our report together, we as the climate change committee should absolutely be talking to Ramy and Sarah and whomever in terms of possible strategies. I was basically referring to the way that we sort of interact with staff. One of the things that comes up, and Carrie will nod her head, and anybody who's been on the commission will nod their head, is, staff, we have experts in the city, and they're staff. That's why they exist. And that's why we pay them a lot of money to be those experts. And we should just, we as committee members should just be, you have to, be respectful of the things that they do and the knowledge that they have in house. So that's sort of my suggestion. So I'm sorry, Scott, to have misspoken or given some other impression.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll make sure that Ramy's feedback is provided to Sarah. I don't know what she's using, but I know she's going to get that feedback.
And it's in the report. I wrote that up, so it's like there's resources and there's something in that that document. The question is just, is it getting to Sarah? Because I'm not in contact with Sarah, and I just don't know.
I'm in contact with Sarah, so we'll make sure that she gets those resources.
Okay, that'd be great. That way I can kind of, at least if I speak with Ramy again, says, yes, your ideas were being at least looked at by Sarah. That would make me feel better than just kind of hoping she's doing it. That'd be, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. So this is the other, as I was talking about a little bit ago, this is the other end of the sort of adaptation outreach in terms of, community input. These are the people, these are the constituents on the receiving end of the decisions that we're going to make. What's their forest going to look like? What are their seawalls going to look like? What's their drainage plan going to look like? Are they happy with that? Are they happy that we're sizing our drainage plans for 10-year storms and not 20-year storms or 50-year storms, and this is what the cost is? And a lot of times we won't be able to answer these questions, but a lot of times we don't know what the questions are. And I think public outreach of the sort that we should be doing here will tell us what the questions are and what the concerns of the community are, and make sure that we answer the right questions. Does that sound good to everybody?
Jeff, I think that's crucial. I think I appreciate the fact that we are recognizing this and that we are willing to take action on it, because to not seek this kind of input would create, I think, a real problem for us in the long run in terms of acceptability and even in terms of City Council approving some of our recommendations. Because if there is not an understanding, and this goes back to your, what do we need in terms of marketing materials, and I would say marketing materials / educational materials to help people understand and to have them thoughtfully give us input. I'll use Carmel Foundation as a recent example. It might be difficult for Carmel Foundation to initially see why it's important to have input into a discussion about climate change. But once the discussion begins, it opens up pathways for building awareness and for gaining buy-in. So I feel like what you are suggesting is essential.
Well, great, thank you. So
yeah, one thing I wanted to maybe suggest in terms of these constituents on the receiving end, I'm wondering if we might, because it's difficult to ask people, it's going to be engineers will understand the difference between 10 or a pipe that's sized to a 10 or a 20-year storm, it may be worthwhile to do maybe a bit of a visioning effort with those folks. And what do they envision the city looking like in 20, 30 years? You know, we know we'll have more drought. We know we'll have stronger storms. We know the sea will be rising. How do we envision the city then? And maybe they provide maybe that vision and we work on how we get there potentially. I just feel like it might be easier for people than trying to come up with strategies potentially. Maybe it'll be easier to come up with strategies if we have a vision.
Mm-hmm.
So is this a vision? Is this like a technical vision? Like, you know, is it, and by technical vision, I mean, you know, extract some data out of the RCP catalog and then say, we're going to have stronger storms and sea level is going to be 3 feet higher? Or is this a vision in terms of...
Yeah, I'm envisioning something more qualitative just for the public, just because the more technical we get, the less, the less, you know, the harder it is to really feel. So, you know, it'll be more like, remember the storms of, you know, 2 years ago. If we know that these are, you know, going to be coming more often, how do you envision we would, you know, how would you want the city to be able to deal with these more often? And maybe people will say, well, we should cut down all the trees, but that'll be, you know what I mean? Like in terms of like a vision of what is the city going to look like? And how do we think? And I think in terms of vision, both for climate action and adaptation, it might get us more into a more aspirational vision as opposed to the doom and gloom that we unfortunately have to.
The aspirational vision, if there is anything like that that comes out of it, can guide some specifics.
Right, exactly.
Read the technical side very easily.
Yes, I feel more like a qualitative vision at the receiving end, so that we can start to extrapolate some strategies out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Is that part of the workshop in November you're thinking?
That was my thought for the workshop in November.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
How would that effort start? Would that effort start with like a draft vision that you or someone else on the committee would put together and then we'd refine it during that workshop? Or would it start at the workshop? Or
I think it would be, we wouldn't necessarily, and I'm not talking about a vision statement necessarily. I'm talking about a vision of what do you guys, you know, and so I would say, you know, what I'm sort of thinking is, you know, having a short intro saying, hey, this is, you know, we did a vulnerability assessment, we're you know, these are the things that are going to change. You know, what do you think? So, you know, storms are getting stronger, you know, it's getting hotter, etc. What do you envision 20 years from now, the city looking like to be able to address these issues? Mm-hmm. And then also same thing for climate action. We want to get to zero emissions, carbon neutrality. How do you envision this city is going to look like? Like, what are the things that are going to be important to get there?
I think that's a good point, because we're going to start maybe introducing some ideas of how we're going to do this. And you're trying to get people, you're trying to lay it out and trying to get people think for the future.
Yes, yes. And I would provide probably a few examples of things that, you know, could be different, just to get people sort of thinking about it and just to get their thoughts out there.
Well, Lynette's really good at this. I think she could help out, right?
Sure.
So so I have a suggestion, for a comment and a suggestion. The comment is, I think this is a great idea because when I think about the way my brain works, it's a lot easier to move towards something than away from something. Right. And I think that moving towards a vision is a much better story than running away from, you know, climate change, even though they're the same thing. So I think this is a great idea. And I would suggest, and I know I'm not supposed to do this, but why don't There is a staff member, I think, that would be good at this, Bob, not Bob, Ashley.
Mhm.
I think this is right up. I think this is something that would really appeal to Ashley. I think this sort of thing is up her alley. So why don't I have a conversation with Chip about that, and we can draft Lynette. We can draft Lynette and Ashley, maybe. Let me, I'll talk to you, Agnes. Let me talk to Chip about it.
I think Ashley would be interested in that.
Oh, definitely.
You're right.
Mhm.
She might be a little busy though.
So I'll talk to Chip and Agnes, and we can get back and talk about this next week.
Okay, sounds good.
But it's a good idea. Really good idea.
But thank you for that. We'll have to figure out how that works in. So this list I have on this slide is just a list I thought of at the top of my head as I was putting the slide together. So there are lots of groups of people out there that we should be talking to, and I'll trust that each of you will deal with this with the organizations that are on your list. This is the action plan, the action work plan that Agnes has been shepherding, and on this one we're actually sort of on time. We haven't missed a big window, so we're good for this. In terms of these two big public outreach sections, one is identify opportunities for community workshops and educational outreach. I think we should kind of be doing that. We should probably start this discussion. A lot of the things that we're going to talk about. We actually did start this discussion a little bit when we talked about using Scott. I think Scott and John to sort of be in charge of understanding some of the things that we might suggest. So we've sort of started this effort, but I think we should all be aware of. And so this is sort of the same strategy of experts and constituents, the same constituents. So the CRA is a constituent, the Rotary Club, the foundation, they're all constituents. If we're going to not let people drive in cars, everybody's a constituent, whatever it is. The Chamber of Commerce, everybody's sort of involved in that, and we should just be aware of that. So I won't go down I want to give the same spiel again. So everybody's sort of okay with this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. I talked at the beginning of the presentation about sort of the collateral that we needed in terms of presentation or handouts or something like that. So if someone's going to go give a presentation to the Carmel Residents Association in Carpenter Hall, what sort of materials do you need for people to take with you, for people to take from you? So any sort of brainstorming on this? Don't everybody speak at once.
Well, at the risk of being the person who always speaks first and longest, part of it really needs to be a balance between basic education and real marketing, because there, in my view, there would need to be a foundational understanding. We need to have people understand these basic facts. And then the marketing piece comes into, and why are these important that therefore makes us need to do anything about it? I think it's pretty easy to think in our little postage stamp size Carmel-by-the-Sea that what we do doesn't make any difference. So why are we really worried about this? And so it's both an educational component of what we have come to understand is coming. And then it's the marketing piece of selling our constituents on the importance of doing something about it. That, sea level rise is going to happen regardless of what we're doing right here. But it's important for us to help people understand why it is we need to do anything, if all of we don't do anything, then it becomes the worst case scenario. So I feel like it's the combination of both. And maybe we can, in our interactions with the organizations we're responsible for, begin to think of those interactions in that kind of two-pronged approach. One is understanding and the other is buy-in for doing something.
What about proposed solutions as well? Do you want to, is that part of this discussion, or do you want to? Is that a later?
It feels like, to me, John, it feels like it's an event, it's an eventual piece, because it's kind of like buy into what? You know, if we're asking people to buy into some sort of action, then they need to have an understanding of what that might be.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether this material, collateral or PowerPoint or whatever it is, do we want to introduce potential actions or recommendations that we would make to the council on the science and the information and the marketing aspect? Or does that come later? I guess that's my question.
We could use some of the opportunities we identified.
Yeah.
So John, let me ask you a question. You probably have some group. I'm sure you have some group that you're assigned. How many times do you think you can get together with them? Like, I'm thinking about, the CRA. So, to sort of use, the conversation that you and Lynette just had, how many times am I going to be able to get together with the CRA in the next 6 months in order to sort of build up interest in this and get some buy-in? Is the answer to that question once, or is the answer to that question twice?
I think
some of these groups are going to be difficult to meet with twice. And I honestly don't know how to, so John's right. I mean, at some point we have to give them a solution. And I think that's really important. We don't want people showing up at the council meeting and say, I don't like this solution. So we need to sort of create awareness around the solution. But Lynette's also right in that we need to have this, we do need to do some sort of basic understanding, basic education. I think it's less important to do that now than it was, say, 5 years ago, because there's been so much in the news, especially in the course of the past few months, especially in the course of like the past year, starting with the fires in California last summer. There's been so much in the news about climate change. So I think some of that task is done.
Well, for the CRA, what if you have, as Anya suggested, an initial meeting where you're bringing up the goals of what are the sort of goals that everyone has for what will things look like, and bring up the science, bring up the marketing and that, and then come back later with a proposed set of responses or recommendations that we could make as a community.
So the CRA, to use your example, the CRA, Carrie and I did meet with the CRA, and we have had, we had the first meeting where we talked about what the committee is doing. So I don't feel, and yes, you're right, people do forget these things, but I don't feel like if we're going to have a 45-minute sit down with the CRA, that we would need to spend more than a few minutes, at least the first time, in talking about what climate change is, because we've already done that. We have checked that box with that group already. So maybe with the CRA, which my guess is one of the more important groups, we should try to set 2 meetings. One would be to ask the questions, and then one would be to sort of provide the answers. And sort of keep in mind, the items that Lynette mentioned a few minutes ago.
Do we want to try and get them to our meeting? Is that something that we
just haven't had a lot of luck. We haven't had a lot of luck, getting 40 people here, 40 people to this meeting. You know, I think when Carrie and I spoke on Zoom to the CRA, we had dozens of people. So it was a pretty good turnout. And I'm pretty sure we could get the same kind of turnout again. You know, I'm pretty sure that we could talk to, you know, in the CRA's case, I'm pretty sure we could talk to Nancy and we could arrange a couple of 40 or 50 person meetings. You know, so the CRA and the Rotary Club are probably pretty easy gets. To use two off of my list. Other organizations may be more difficult. This goes back to one of the things I was talking about before, which is, you know, planning for these things now according to the schedule will make things a lot easier. You know, let's just assume, you know, we have this meeting in November. Let's just try and, you know, sort of plan around before and after the meeting or whatever it is. And we can probably get, if we're good about it, my guess is we can schedule a dozen of these things or a couple dozen of these things, whatever the groups are, and sort of get it straightened out. What do you think, John?
I don't know. I'm still a little confused about what you're going to want to produce for the presentation or for the PowerPoint or the collateral that you're going to develop. It seems like you have to have something on paper in terms of solutions to make it an effective meeting at some point. So that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to get buy-in on from them in what's going to be finally suggested to the council.
You know, John, maybe in order to get to that point, we express to the groups, we're looking for a kind of two session commitment. One is to help us understand your input and where your vision is or where your thoughts are about the future, so that as we develop the recommendations, we're not discounting these important concerns that you have. And then when you tell us that, we need to go away and synthesize all of that and come back, talk about the real recommendations, and then ask you if we've heard you correctly and if you're, you know, if there are any kind of modifications that we need to further make. Because I think if we go to people with the recommendations kind of already baked, it doesn't feel like we're genuinely asking for input.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think what Anya suggested is sort of this initial meeting to listen and then to come back. But I do think we have to come back with recommendations and make it a, you know, have some concrete action items.
Absolutely.
Proposing.
Michael, did you have some suggestions?
Well, it just seems to me you're talking about a buy-in. The buy-in's the action plan, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So don't we need some kind of a preliminary action plan that we bring to them? You know, not with Lynette's point, you know, that it's preliminary. So you bring a preliminary action plan to groups like the CRA, you get their input, you know, you take the input in, and then you come back with a you know, an action plan that reflects their input. I mean, that's kind of what you do in a workshop. That's what we've done in workshops. We have sort of a format that we've started, some topics, you know, it's a preliminary plan, action plan, and then you get their input, and then you put it together and you know, and kind of move forward.
I'm wondering.
I mean, we're kind of, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if the goal of our initial, if we're going to do outreach a couple different times, is the goal of that first one to let them know that about what we've been doing over the past, you know, 6 months, 1 year. I think, you know, they might want to see, you know, the vulnerability assessment and some of because there are opportunities identified in there, and that could be our starting point for a discussion.
I agree with that. I think that's sorry to interrupt you. I don't want to forget this. I think that start using the vulnerability assessment as sort of that initial conversation will lead to public input. Mm-hmm. We will get ideas. You know, I don't know what those things are, but I think using that as a starting point we'll get that public input that I think, we're serious and this is what we've done so far. And now we want to hear from you about these different ideas. So sorry for the interruption.
Yeah, no worries. And then I was just going to add that maybe that initial outreach should be also geared towards getting them to the workshop so that if they don't think of ideas right then and there, they can come and actually provide feedback, at the workshop also.
Yeah, I think it's really important that the groups that we're assigned to, that we invite these groups to come to the workshop so that we can get as many, obviously it's probably going to be done via Zoom, unfortunately, but we tell them we're having this workshop to do some visioning and to let people know where we're at. And it's really important for them to come. And then when we go back to them on an individual basis, there is some foundation to work from. And that would springboard their ideas of hopefully giving us feedback. Our goal is really to get these people at this workshop. And that's going to be hopefully November 18th, right? So I think really reaching out to these people and making sure that they know this is the time to come and personally invite them. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think also just while I'm thinking about this, to go back to a point that Carrie made, if these things are going to be online, I pay for a Zoom account, not this one, but I do pay my $15 a month, and we can record meetings. And I think that may be a worthwhile, if you're going to, I know we've asked a lot of the eight of us. But if you're going to be leading meetings or participating in meetings, it might be worthwhile to pay the $15 for a couple months and record the meetings that you go to, so that we have them and we can go back to them and actually hear, it takes some of the note-taking pressure off and stuff like that. So something to think about if you're doing these things remotely, at least.
Yeah, that's a good question, whether we're going to do it remotely or not remotely. There's a possibility of doing it outdoors too, potentially, if we wanted to. If we were to do it, the weather's
good at the Force Theater.
Yeah. If we were to do it remotely, there are tools now available. So, like sticky note type things where you can write your idea and put it on a sticky note, and it seems like, I'm not sure it's going to be, good for our demographic necessarily, because it's very, sort of tech intensive. But I want to try and provide as much different ways to provide feedback and not have to have people speak necessarily in a public setting, only because I just know that it can be just off-putting. So we'll kind of think about this maybe and figure if we can do it in person, I think it might actually be a better turnout.
So what I heard from, I think John kind of summarized it, was that John and Carrie kind of summarized it, was that we're going to try to get together with these groups once before the big meeting in November, and then once, at the beginning of the year, to sort of roll out once before, to sort of prime the pump and solicit some basic feedback first, go to this workshop in November, and then at the beginning of the year, sort of roll out a draft plan. Is that, do we have?
I think the workshop may be that first meeting from my perspective, especially if it, like the CRA, we've already talked with them. So I think the workshop, trying to get them to go to the workshop, I don't know if meeting them before, I don't know if that would work as well as getting him to get to the workshop.
I think that meeting with them before, Carrie, I think that we'll be lucky if we get 20 people to the workshop. But I think if we sat down with the CRA in the format that we did last time, Nancy could probably round up 40 or 50 people for us. That's my, and so I think that rounding up 40 or 50 people and sort of introducing, as Anya said, sort of starting with the vulnerability assessment and sort of walking through that will lead to a lot of questions. And a lot of input from the CRA, in particular, just to use the CRA, for example, will lead to a lot of input from the CRA. And that would serve the purpose of both getting the people that were really interested to the workshop on the 18th. And also it would provide us some input as to, where the sticky points are going to be on the 18th. Mm-hmm. So, if we get caught up talking about the drainage, in our meeting with the CRA for whatever reason, then we'll have that information when we go into the workshop, and we can pay either special attention or skip that subject entirely. I don't know what it is, but it can afford us, there'll be some good information for us to use in conducting that workshop. So that was my thinking specifically with respect to the CRA, but
and I think to your point, Jeff, that's all CRA specific, but different groups have had different amounts of prior contact and will be at a different stage on the path, if you will. So it may be that an initial meeting before the workshop is truly an introduction for these people.
Yeah, and I'm happy to, we're all adults and we're all responsible adults, and I'm happy to sort of leave this. We've had a really good conversation about this, about what my thoughts are and what Carrie's thoughts are and Lynette's thoughts and everybody's thoughts. And I'm happy to, leave this to the 8 of us individually. We've all been assigned these groups, and I think we all know them, or we'll get to know them, and we should all do what we think is right. Given sort of, given that the two important things are the workshop and the final report. And the question is, how do we facilitate a good workshop, with good subjects and good attendees and a good final report? So I think, it is sort of up to everybody individually. And I'm happy to have that. But back to,
comfortable with that?
Is everybody comfortable with that? Yeah.
Well, back to your question about what are you producing for this?
Yeah.
What are you producing? PowerPoint that we're supposed to take with us for this, or just do it on our own? Or
well, let me ask you, John. What would be helpful? What is we should produce? We as a team should produce what the individual team members think will be useful in these exercises. Do you want to put off that discussion until next month when you've had an opportunity to talk to your organizations and sort of map out a basic little plan about what you think you might do? We can do that.
Well, I don't know. I'm just thinking, I have the AIA, and they're probably going to be way ahead and way more towards controlling greenhouse gas emissions than we would be, or the codes would be, or any REACH codes that the city might want to add on top of the current or proposed building codes. So I would think I would just talk to the board or the people in the committee on the environment and the AIA and just find out what they're doing. And they're not going to necessarily have any issues with what we come up with, because their idea is more stringent than probably where we will end up. So I'm not sure I need anything other than just conversations to find out where they're at and make sure that we have what they're doing folded into what we're doing, and if they have any comments for us.
So you're comfortable getting their recommendations. So you would bring like some form of their recommendations back to the 8 of us, or
for instance, there's a net zero by 2030 program in the AI, and it's a laundry list of things you can do to get there. In the bill, like Lynette had mentioned earlier, what are some of the things that we can do to cut greenhouse gas emissions or get to net zero sooner than what the state is requiring? So I can bring some of those ideas back to the committee. And if that's some of what Scott and I have been working on, are those kinds of issues.
I think that'd be great.
Yeah, so I don't know that it needs a meeting or a presentation or anything like that necessarily.
Yeah, okay, that's great.
That's just a perfect example of how these groups are at such different places.
Right.
Maybe, John, you'd like to come talk to the CRA then.
I think it's important just for individually, like you said, Jeff, for us to have a plan with the particular groups. Because, you know, in Lynette's case, she can't even get a meeting with the
Foundation, right? It's coming.
Well, it's not your fault. It's Sunset Center. It's the Carmel Foundation. You know, at some point we're going to have to say, look, you know, we've tried. We're going to invite you to the workshop if we, you know, if you want to hear what we're doing, and then we're going to have to throw up our hands because some people are engaged and some people aren't.
True.
Yeah, I would say on the topic of the foundation, we absolutely have to get them involved. We cannot take no, like that's one group that we literally cannot take no for an answer.
And I feel like we'll get there.
Yeah.
I feel like we'll get there.
And I know some people that live in the foundation housing.
Yeah.
We'll get there, Lynette.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, what do you think, Jeff?
Any more comments on this? So why don't we put off the discussion of what materials we need to generate until next month when we get together and sort of have this discussion again, and everybody's sort of talk to their organizations, and we see there may not be any point in putting together physical materials if we're going to have all these meetings on Zoom, like for example. I don't know. We'll have to, you know, we'll each have to work that out with our organizations to see how big they are and what it is. Sound good?
Okay, so we have homework for our next meeting. We want to try and reach out to as many of those groups as we can by the next meeting.
Yep.
Yeah, so Agnes, do you want to add the foundation to the list, and then we do a ceremonial handoff, and you can send the list to me, and I'll just write the notes down of what the things that people say.
Okay.
The interactions that people have. Okay. And I'll try not to pester people too much.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate
except
it.
Except for Carrie.
Oh. Of course.
I'm allowed to pester Carrie.
All right.
So I guess we'll call it a day, and we'll see everybody next month.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good discussion. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Agnes and Evan and Jeff.